In the name of God, Amen. I give and bequeath unto my well-beloved wife, Sarah Bush, and to her heirs and assigns forever, all my household furniture, clocks excepted, all the bedding and furniture thereof, curtains, sheets, pillows, pillowcases, bedsteads, all the crockery in the house, working utensils, and all other movable property in the house. Also, my Negro girls, Patience and Phyllis. Also my young pied oxen with a yoke and chain complete for use, and my best cart with a good axe and hoe. My swine and half of my sheep. Also during the time my said wife shall continue my widow, I will that my Negro man, Cull, shall live with her as her slave, which I give her the improvement of, as aforesaid. And I give and devise to my said daughter Fanny, her heirs and assigns, my black girl Candace, to my daughter Charlotte, my black girl Millie, to my daughter Grace, my black girl Rose. We're in the Bush Holly House in Greenwich, Connecticut, and we're in the kitchen chamber or attic space of this old 1780s, 1790s structure. This home was owned by Sarah and David Bush. They were among the largest slaveholders in late 18th and early 19th century Connecticut. At one point, the Bush family owned 9 slaves who lived right in this space, in this kitchen chamber and in other parts of this house. They served as domestic laborers for the Bushes. They served as agricultural laborers for the Bushes. They served as valets for the family. And they were very much part of this family in its extended meaning. But they were owned as property. They were property from the cradle to the grave and beyond. By the middle of the 18th century, approximately 1/2 of all ministers, public officials, and lawyers owned at least one slave in Connecticut. And by the eve of the American Revolution in the 1770s, approximately 1/4 of all Connecticut households had at least one slave. Well, it has always been difficult for us to face this part of our past, the fact that slavery was a part of New England. New England in American history has always been perceived as the place where liberty was born. The right to vote, the right to petition, the right to free speech, the right to the ownership of land and property, the right of free movement, the right to pass on their estates to their children. These were guaranteed now in the Great American Bill of Rights, which became law in our Constitution, the first 10 amendments by 1790. These most basic liberties, by and large, were all denied to African Americans who were slaves in New England and in Connecticut. We have to develop a larger master narrative of American history that allows us to incorporate the tragedy and the transcendence of the story of slavery. Slavery is not merely the story of the victimization of African peoples or the victimization of African Americans born here. It is also the story of African peoples who came to the New World through a terrible rupture in their lives, a terrible rupture in their social structure, a terrible rupture in their cultural self-worth, but nevertheless transformed themselves, rebuilt themselves, made something of their lives, made a new culture, and made the society that Americans were living in, even in Connecticut and New England, by the 1790s and the turn of the 19th century. Well, among the questions one faces by visiting this very space is, how did African American slaves actually live? How did they spend their daily lives? When they had privacy, which they had in these attic rooms, what kind of life could they create? What kind of family could they create? What did they talk about? What did they dream about? How did children hope? How did their parents help them learn how to imagine a better life. Those kinds of conversations occur across time in all civilizations, across every culture, and in every case, children must be raised to have hope. They must be raised to imagine some kind of new life. And in these kinds of quarters, that went on, in spite of the fact these people were owned as property, in spite of the fact they were led to believe they had no exit or no way out. But also one gains by being in a space like this a sense of the authenticity of history, of walls that are original, of a site and a place that is real. And you can begin in a certain silence to sometimes even hear the voices of the past. And if you read enough about it and you learn enough about it, you can begin to understand to an extent what the inner lives and experiences of those people in another time really were like. Local history matters because a larger history of the nation or of the world has to begin somewhere. It has to begin with individual stories and with family stories and with local stories. All memory is ultimately local. And as a famous politician once said, all politics is ultimately local. And therefore, history begins at the local level. It's where curiosity begins. It's where the imagination begins. And if we are to develop a genuine, sophisticated sense of the past, it is likely to begin by asking questions in our own neighborhood, in our own state, in our own town.